When we think of the United States, we think of wars, revolutions, presidents, and speeches. But beneath the loud pages of history, there is a quieter story of ideas, of contradictions, of silent transformation. This is not the story of battles. This is the story of the mind behind the flag you're watching still rise, where we explore silent empires, invisible revolutions, and the minds that shape them. Most nations are built with noise, revolutions, declarations, uprisings. But America? America was built with both noise and silence. Behind every public speech was a quiet negotiation. Behind every visible law was an invisible idea. Behind every president, a private journal, a moral dilemma, a sleepless night. This is the interior history of the United States. Not of what happened, but of how the nation thought. The Invisible Constitution in 1787, delegates from 13 states gathered in a hot Philadelphia room. They weren't just writing laws, they were creating a mental blueprint. It was an idea machine. The U.S. Constitution wasn't a weapon. It didn't scream for power, it whispered, "Greater than we the people." The Founding Fathers weren't perfect men, but they knew what had to be restrained. Monarchy, chaos, unchecked desire. So they created a system not of trust, but of checks. A system that trusted no one, not even the people entirely. George Washington could have become king, but he didn't. Why? Because the invisible foundation of America wasn't power, it was restraint. A quiet, almost spiritual decision. To lead, then let go. The silent foundations beneath expansion in Division 1800 to 1860 manifest destiny. Quiet seduction of land, the phrase manifest destiny, was never shouted from balconies. It whispered in school books, sermons, and legislation. It was not just a political slogan, it was a belief that Americans were meant to stretch from Atlantic to Pacific, that the land itself belonged to them, by virtue of destiny. But in silence, it hid something darker. Entire nations, Cherokee, Sioux, Apache, were erased not by declarations, but by documents. Not by screams, but signatures. It was a quiet conquest. The trail of tears didn't echo with victory. It echoed with absence. Land was gained. But something human was lost. The moral question nobody wanted to ask slavery was not America's hidden shame. It was its open contradiction. How could a nation built on liberty hold millions in chains? Most remained silent. The founders had avoided it. The churches debated it. The Supreme Court ignored it, but a few. Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, William Lloyd Garrison spoke. And their voices were like matches in a dark cathedral. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future. Frederick Douglass, yet even these words were not enough. The country was being pulled by two silent forces: the economic necessity of slavery and the moral impossibility of it. This tension would not remain silent for long. The court that couldn't hear conscience, the Supreme Court, in 1857, ruled in the Dred Scott case. A black man, born into slavery, had sued for freedom. The court said greater than a black man has no rights which a white man is bound to respect. It was not just a legal defeat, it was a moral silence etched in law. But even here, the system of checks and balance, slow as it was, began to rattle. The quiet patience of compromise was wearing thin. The nation's heart begins to burn. By the mid-1800s, the calm center of America was cracking. Books like Uncle Tom's Cabin Didn't Tea just tell stories. They moved people. The North grew louder in its discomfort. The South grew firmer in its defense. But the war didn't begin with gunfire. It began with silence. Polite disagreement, delayed bills, speeches that avoided the word slavery. Until one man, Abraham Lincoln, decided to listen to the silence and give it a voice. The engine of expansion, from manifest destiny to industrial power as the sun rose on a new century. America looked westward, not just with curiosity, but with hunger. A hunger for land, for identity, and for power. It was not just about geography, it was ideology. It was called manifest destiny. The dream of the continent, the belief was simple. It is America's divine right to stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And so, they moved. By wagon, by horse, by foot. Thousands of families packed their lives and set out across dangerous trails like the Oregon Trail, hoping to reach paradise, but often finding hardship. But the movement was not just individual. It was national policy. Fought a war with Mexico and absorbed massive territories, including modern-day California, Arizona, New Mexico, and more. Under President James K. Polk in the 1840s, America annexed Texas. This wasn't just expansion, it was the transformation of a regional republic into a continental empire. The conflict behind the dream, but with expansion came division. Every new state raised an old question. Will this be a free state or a slave state? This question burned hotter with each mile of new land. The North, increasingly industrial and abolitionist, saw slavery as a stain. The South, built on cotton and plantations, saw it as essential. And so with every step west, the nation stepped closer to the age of steam, steel, and telegraphs. While political conflicts simmered, a new kind of power quietly emerged. Not in Congress, but in factories, rail yards, and invention workshops. The Industrial Revolution hit America like a storm. Railroads stitched the nation together. Telegraphs made communication nearly instant. Factories transformed towns into cities and workers into wage earners. Inventions like the mechanical reaper, the cotton gin, and the steam engine multiplied production. Businessmen like Cornelius Vanderbilt began to dominate railroads, while others like Andrew Carnegie eyed steel. Chasing a dream and finding crowded tenements and brutal work, cities grew. So did inequality. Immigrants flooded ports in New York and Boston. It was a time of promise and pressure. Innovation and exploitation walked hand in hand. The native nations. The quiet tragedy, as Americans moved west, they crossed lands that were not empty. They were ancient, populated, alive with culture and spirit. But to the American state, these were obstacles to be removed. Tribes like the Cherokee, the Sioux, the Apache, they were forced to walk the trail of tears or face total war. Treaties were made and broken, villages burned, nations erased from maps. It was not just physical destruction, it was spiritual theft. The attempt to erase memory, language, and identity. And while Americans built their new empire, they buried the old one beneath it. The coming storm by 1860, America was bigger than ever, but also more fragile. Half the country lived by slave labor. The other half, by free industry. Neither would bend. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 was the final spark. The South seceded, the nation fractured, and soon fields would burn, brothers would fight, and America would face its darkest hour. The fire that could have killed the Republic, the American Civil War, and the struggle to rebuild the war that nearly destroyed America. And the silence that followed, greater than some wars are fought between nations. But this one was fought within one soul, a nation tearing itself apart, a war that killed more Americans than any other, and a silence afterward that was even harder to survive. A house-divided America had grown powerful, but not united. The North, factories, immigrants, abolitionists. The South, plantations, cotton, slavery. One saw progress, the other saw tradition, but both were stubborn, and neither side would compromise. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president, without a single vote from the South. To Southern elites, this was a declaration of war, not of guns, but of culture, of power, of survival. They didn't wait. One by one, states began to leave the Union. South Carolina was first. Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia followed. By February 1861, even before Lincoln took office, the Confederate States of America had formed, complete with their own president, Jefferson Davis. The war begins. The spark came at Fort Sumter, a Union garrison in Charleston Harbor. On April 12, 1861, Confederate cannons opened fire. No soldiers died in that bombardment. 620,000 would die in the years to come. A war of brothers, the American Civil War was not clean, not organized, not romantic. It was bloody. It was confusing. It was modern war in a pre-modern world. At Bull Run, civilians brought picnics to watch the battle. They fled in terror. At Antietam, Over 22,000 men were killed or wounded in one day. At Gettysburg, bodies lay so thick on the ground that the soil turned red. Generals like Ulysses S. Grant and Robert E. Lee became legends. But behind every name was a pile of letters never sent home, a pair of boots never filled again. A war that hollowed the heart of a nation. Emancipation and its limits. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, that all persons held as slaves shall be thenceforward, and forever free. But it only applied to Confederate territory, not the slave-holding border states in the Union. It was more political than moral. But it changed the war. Now, it wasn't just about secession, it was about freedom. And Black Americans, both free and enslaved, joined the Union Army by the tens of thousands. Still, racism was deep. And the North's fight for abolition was never as pure as it looked on paper. The Union prevails by 1864, the South was collapsing. Sherman's march to the sea devastated Georgia. Grant's armies pressed Lee to the breaking point. On April 9, 1865, Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse. The war was over. The Union was saved. But the peace was broken before it began. Lincoln's assassination just 5 days after the war ended, Abraham Lincoln was shot in the head by John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater. It was not just the killing of a president. It was the killing of hope for a gentle peace. Lincoln had called for malice toward none, but his voice was silenced, and in his place came confusion, revenge, and resentment. Reconstruction, or the illusion of it, the South was ruined. Physically, economically, and spiritually. Reconstruction began with high hopes. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th granted citizenship. The 15th gave black men the right to vote. Black Americans entered Congress, built schools, founded businesses. For a moment, it looked like a new South was rising. But white supremacy did not vanish. It adapted. Groups like the Ku Klux Klan terrorized black citizens. Southern states passed Jim Crow laws. And in 1877, federal troops withdrew, ending Reconstruction. A silent agreement was made. Let the South do what it wants. Just don't start another war. Wrote sanitized textbooks, told stories of honor on both sides. The silence that followed for the next century, America tried to forget. It built monuments. But beneath it all were unmarked graves, abandoned plantations, generations of trauma, especially for black families. The war didn't end in 1865. Its silence simply became harder to hear. Lesson learned: America nearly destroyed itself. Not over geography, but over identity. It was not a war between the North and South. It was a war between two versions of America. One that believed in liberty, even if imperfectly. One that believed in bondage, even if proudly. And although the Union was preserved, the wounds remain, not always visible, but always there. The cold silence, power, fear, and the shadow of the atom when the atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima. It didn't just end a war, it shattered the old world order. And from those ashes rose something colder, more calculating, and more dangerous than ever before. The United States stood alone, untouched, undefeated, a superpower with the ability to erase cities in a blink. But absolute power never comes without a cost. At home, victory gave way to paranoia. Are you now, or have you ever been, a member of the Communist Party? This question echoed in courtrooms, radio broadcasts, and living rooms across America. Senator Joseph McCarthy did not create the fear, he simply gave it a name. McCarthyism was not politics, it was performance. Accusation became evidence. Silence became guilt. Hollywood screenwriters, school teachers, scientists, all watched their lives crumble under suspicion. And in this atmosphere of fear, a quiet revolution began. Suburbia. White picket fences, two-car garages, smiling nuclear families. But beneath the surface, a deeper story unfolded. Men who returned from war in silence. Women told to leave the factory and return to the kitchen. African Americans who had fought fascism abroad and came home to find it still alive in their own towns. And while the government hunted communists in the shadows, another shadow loomed even darker. Nuclear annihilation, duck hand cover drills, concrete fallout shelters. Children taught how to survive the end of the world during recess. The Cold War wasn't just fought in Korea or Berlin or Havana. It was fought in the mind. A war of ideology, media, and silent threats. America had built a machine of unprecedented scale, military, industrial, and psychological. But as President Eisenhower would later warn, beware the military-industrial complex, because the greatest threat might not come from Moscow, but from within. Freedom was still the promise, but fear was now the language. Fire in the streets. The civil awakening. The 1960s did not whisper, they roared. America, wrapped in its Cold War armor, found its streets erupting with fire, fists, and voices, not from enemies abroad, but from citizens within. It began with a seat on a bus. Rosa Parks refused to move. Her silence was louder than any speech. From Montgomery to Birmingham, from Selma to Washington, the civil rights movement rose. It wasn't just about laws, it was about dignity. A right to walk without fear, to vote without tricks, to live without second-class citizenship. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't hold a gun. He held a dream. But dreams have enemies. And in April 1968, a bullet ended the man, not the movement. Meanwhile, another war, one not cold, raged in Vietnam. What began as a mission to stop communism became a quagmire of confusion, jungle warfare, and broken morale. Draft cards were burned, protests flooded campuses. The government said America was winning, but television said otherwise. Night after night, images of napalm, body bags, and burning villages pierced the illusion. It was the first war America lost, not just on the battlefield, but in the hearts of its people. And while Black Americans fought for rights and young Americans protested a foreign war, women began their own revolution. Eddie Frieden's The Feminine Mystique asked a question too long ignored. Is this all? The push for equality in the workplace, in the home, in the law, became unstoppable. The personal had become political. But even revolutions bring backlash. The assassinations of Robert Kennedy, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr., the riots in Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles, the burning of draft offices, the National Guard at Kent State University. Firing on students, it all painted a nation at war with itself. The American flag flew high, but it fluttered in a storm of division. Liberty had been promised, but equality had to be demanded, again and again. Profit and illusion. The silent shifts of power, the fires of protest faded. But beneath the silence, the ground still moved. The 1980s didn't scream like the 60s. They smiled, wore suits, talked of markets and freedom. And leading the charge was a former actor, Ronald Reagan. He spoke of a shining city on a hill, of shrinking government, of growing wealth. He promised a return to greatness, but greatness, it seemed, now wore a business suit. Reaganomics became the new gospel. Cut taxes, cut regulation, let the wealthy invest. And the wealth, they said, would trickle down, and for some it did. Stock markets soared, Wall Street glittered, but in the shadows, factories closed, steel towns rusted, inner cities cracked, jobs went overseas, and many who once built America with their hands now felt forgotten. Meanwhile, the Cold War neared its end, not with bombs but with whispers. The Berlin Wall fell, Soviet Union dissolved, and suddenly, America stood alone. The world's only superpower. Victory, yes, but also a new burden. With no enemy in sight, America turned inward again, but not to heal, to consume. The 1990s began with George H.W. Bush and ended with Bill Clinton. Two very different leaders, but both navigating the same undercurrent. Globalization. Borders blurred, trade expanded, internet flickered into life. A new economy was born, fast, digital, and invisible. Dot-coms rose like rockets. Paper millionaires appeared overnight. America was changing, but the change was quiet, polite, and wrapped in innovation. Yet beneath the glass towers and glowing screens, old wounds remained. Racial divides, political divides, economic divides. But in the moment, few listened. The 1990s felt like a break. A breath between storms. Peace, profit, possibility. The Cold War had ended, but a colder silence began. Not of fear, but of forgetting. The day the world stopped, 9/11s, in the era of fear. It was a clear September morning. Planes flew. Children went to school. Markets opened. The world turned. And then the world stopped. September 11th, 2001. 4 planes, 19 hijackers, 2 towers, and a silence that echoed louder than any explosion. New York. Smoke rose where ambition once stood. Washington. A hole torn into the Pentagon, the heart of American defense. Pennsylvania. Ordinary citizens on Flight 93 fought back, died heroes. That morning, America was not attacked as a country, it was attacked as an idea. For the first time in decades, Americans felt vulnerable, not in distant lands, but at home. Fear became a shadow in every airport. Trust dissolved into suspicion, and grief gave birth to rage. In response, America declared a new kind of war, the war on terror. First, Afghanistan, to dismantle the Taliban, to hunt Osama bin Laden, then Iraq. Weapons of mass destruction were claimed. Regime change promised. The world watched, some cheered, others warned. But the war went on year after year. Thousands of soldiers deployed, trillions of dollars spent, thousands of civilians lost, and still no end in sight. What began as a response to terror slowly blurred into occupation, and then fatigue. Back home, another war brewed, invisible, quiet, but everywhere. A war on privacy. The Patriot Act, surveillance programs, phone taps, airport scans, all in the name of safety, all at the cost of freedom. Meanwhile, the economy danced dangerously close to collapse. Housing markets boomed. But on borrowed time, banks bet high and lied low. And by 2008, the cracks turned into a chasm. Lehman Brothers collapsed. Wall Street trembled. Jobs vanished. Homes were lost. Trust was shattered. It was a decade of trauma. Not one moment, but many. Layered, quiet, lasting, from terror to recession, from hope to doubt, from unity to unrest. The towers fell in a day, but the world built around them collapsed slowly and silently. Hope and hesitation. The Obama years, the country stood at a crossroads, reeling from war, drowning in debt, and divided by fear. And then a name echoed through the noise. Barack Hussein Obama, a junior senator. A calm voice, a promise of yes, we can. In 2008, America elected its first black president. History cracked open, and for a moment, the country believed in itself again. But behind the confetti and chants, a storm still brewed. The Great Recession was no headline, it was daily life. Homes were gone, jobs were gone, savings were wiped out. Obama walked into the White House carrying not just hope, but the weight of a falling nation. He acted fast. Bailouts for the auto industry, stimulus packages, the Affordable Care Act, what many would call Obamacare. Millions gained health coverage, but millions also protested. Wall Street recovered, but Main Street still struggled. The recovery was real, but uneven. Jobs returned. But trust didn't. At the same time, something old and dark reawakened. Racism. Not the kind in textbooks, but the kind caught on camera. Trayvon Martin Ferguson, Eric Garner. Names became hashtags. Protests filled streets, and a whisper turned into a roar. Black Lives Matter. Obama responded with grace, but also restraint. Some praised his calm, others criticized his silence. He was walking a tightrope between a divided Congress, a restless people, and the burden of symbolism. Abroad, too, the world changed. Osama bin Laden was found, killed in Pakistan. A symbolic victory, but terror didn't end. In the Middle East, the Arab Spring bloomed, then withered. Syria burned. ISIS rose, and once again, America debated. Should it lead or step back? Meanwhile, at home, culture shifted. In 2015, the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage nationwide. A moment of celebration, a mark of progress. Technology exploded. The iPhone became a necessity, social media, a new battlefield, with every tweet and click. Americans grew louder, but not closer. By 2016, something else was building. A quiet exhaustion. With war, with institutions, with politics as usual. Hope was still alive, but hesitation had grown louder. Obama left office with dignity. Scandals were few. His approval remained high. But beneath the calm surface, a storm prepared to rise. He spoke with elegance, governed with caution, and left behind a country still searching for itself. The mirror age greater than it was, no longer about what the world was becoming, but what we had become. The 21st century opened not with a celebration, but with smoke. September 11, 2001. In one morning, America's sense of safety cracked. Terror had touched the homeland, and the world shifted. We entered the age of surveillance, wrapped in flags, fueled by fear, marching into wars with unclear ends. Afghanistan, Iraq, thousands of lives, trillions of dollars. No clear victory, just a slow fade into exhaustion. Meanwhile, back home, a silent revolution was blooming. Not in parliaments, not in protests, but in the palm of your hand. The rise of the mirror smartphones weren't just tools, they were mirrors. Showing us ourselves unfiltered, angry, lonely, addicted. Social media promised connection, but often delivered comparison. Democracy went digital, so did division. We weren't governed by politicians anymore, but by algorithms. What you saw, what you feared, what you clicked, it was all being shaped. Not by truth, but by attention. Crashes, crises, in a pandemic 2008, the economy collapsed. Not from invasion, but from greed, wearing a suit. Millions lost homes, jobs, hope, the response. Bailouts for banks, evictions for families. Then came 2020, a virus no one could see, but everyone felt. Hospitals overflowed, streets emptied, screens became classrooms, churches, lifelines. And through all of it, America kept breathing. Wounded, yes, still standing. The internal collapse, the final threat, wasn't foreign. It wasn't a war. It was internal. Mistrust, polarization, isolation, disguised as freedom. America had grown into the most powerful empire in human history, and yet its people felt more disconnected than ever. The question was no longer what will destroy us. It became, will we destroy ourselves? The quiet collapse and the silent rise. Empires do not fall in fire, they fall in silence. In the moments when no one is watching, when we ignore the warning signs, when convenience becomes more important than community. America's story, like all great stories, is not black or white. It's filled with contradictions, freedom and control, hope and hypocrisy, innovation and inequality. But here's the truth. The empire isn't gone. Not yet. An empire isn't its flag or its president or even its land. An empire is its people. And when people wake up, empires evolve. You've just listened to 3 hours of calm, honest, uncomfortable history. Not the version in textbooks, not the one in political speeches, but the one that lingers beneath everything. Thank you for walking this quiet path with us. If you stayed till the end, you're not just consuming history. You're remembering what matters. This is Still Rise, where stories breathe and silence speaks. Till next time, stay thoughtful, stay grounded, and never stop asking. What kind of history are we making today without realizing it?